Welcome to PUENTE Lab, a podcast where we have conversations around mental health. I'm your host, Dr. Jonathan Martinez, professor in the Department of Psychology at California State University, Northridge. My Puente Research Lab focuses on addressing mental health disparities in care for underserved communities, particularly for Latino families. The goal of our podcast is to create a bridge between science and the community. Today's guest is Dr. Alejandra Acuña, a retired professor of social work and also a licensed clinical social worker. Dr. Acuña, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm interested in knowing what inspired you to work in the mental health field and why focus on children and families.
I mean, I haven't connected the dots 100% yet. You think I would have by now. What I do know for sure is I always say jokingly that I got my LCSW to be my daughter's mom. My daughter has experienced anxiety, depression, a little bit of OCD. And I feel like I've drawn upon or I've leaned into my license and my training and my education and my experience to be her mom. And then at the same time, when I look back, I think I've probably struggled with depression for most of my life and didn't really start to get full treatment until I was at UCLA. And then when I look at my mom, and I'm adopted, so both my adoptive mother and my birth mother, I feel like clearly there were signs of depression there too. I hear sometimes that we study the things or that we teach the things that we need to learn. And so, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The concept of like me search, right? That's what we do in the work we do is things that inspired us growing up. And that's what we're passionate about, right? But I also started to hear about various roles that you have. Like, of course, you are an expert, licensed clinical social worker that works with children and families, and particularly Latino families, but you're also a mother. You know, you're a parent, right? That's a significant role. A lot of times we're people in this area that are supposed to be the experts, but we're also real people as well that have our own struggles and see our own struggles in family and friends and other things, but we're supposed to be thought of as like this kind of all-knowing expert.
And I have to tell you, with all the training and education that I got, before I had my daughter, she's 21 now, but before I had my daughter, when parents would ask me, and I'm sure you've experienced the same, like, you know, do you have kids? I remember my pre-Paulina answer was, I studied child development in college, or I have nieces and nephews that I babysit. And like, I just didn't get the question. And now when they ask me, I know exactly what they want to know. They want to know, like, do you get it? Have you been to that dark place where you could have really hurt your child, but you didn't, but you could have? Like, have you been to that dark place, and will you judge me for it?
Are you a parent, right? And I remember like the standard response. It's like, oh, well, you don't have to personally disclose information. I'm like, well, I feel okay saying I'm not a parent. But like, what's really the reason why they're asking, do you get what I'm going through? I know you're recommending that you do X, Y, and Z, but like, do you even know what it's like to be in my shoes right now?
And what were some of those things that you recommended? You just told me. Like the 20 minutes?
Yeah, like, oh, you know, do 20 minutes of child-directed play. Like in my head, I'm like, it's so easy. And then like when they wouldn't do it, it was like the standard protocol of like, well, what got in the way of doing it? Now I know of like, it's not that parents don't know that these things are important, but life gets in the way and parents are burned out many times.
And that's what they're asking. Like,
yeah.
Do you get it?
Yeah.
As much as we want to, as much as we love our kids, as much as nobody loves their kids more than we do.
Like, what are those outlets or what are ways in which we talk about mental health that maybe doesn't necessarily fit like these westernized conceptualizations? Like, well, you know, what are the terms or phrases we use? What are the conversations we have? Because it's going to come out in some way.
So when I hear sometimes people say like, oh, there's stigma about mental health in the Latinx or Latina community, I don't relate to that. Like, that wasn't my experience growing up. So my mom was from northern Mexico, Chihuahua. And the people from Chihuahua are known to be very frank and direct. And there's a saying in Spanish, no tengo pelos en la lengua, which means roughly, I don't have hair on my tongue. I'm very straightforward. And so I remember my mom talking about nervios or ataque de nervios, cultural concepts of distress that are talked about or understood or known in Latin America. And I remember her freely talking about this with like neighbors, friends, family, and nobody was like whispering and nobody seemed embarrassed or ashamed or judging. It just was like, oh yeah. And when she would have an ataque de nervios, I remember like our babysitter would know exactly what to do to support her. And so I feel like whereas Western medicine or the Western approach or the DSM might call it PTSD, in our communities, in our families, we might call it susto or nervios. I don't say like, oh no, señora, oh no, ma'am, that's not susto, that's PTSD. Because the truth is PTSD was originated in 1980. So like I'm older than PTSD, whereas susto originated like thousands of years ago. So it's been around a lot longer. And the truth is before PTSD, we called it shell shock or a soldier's heart or battle fatigue. And who knows, in 10 to 20 years, it'll be called something else.
Yeah, no, you're hitting on an important point, I think, which is like mental health didn't begin when the DSM began, right? And we think of the DSM and its evolution, now they're in the 5th iteration, just because it's now labeled or talked about, but what is going to change in the next iteration of the DSM? And, you know, what are ways in which things were pathologized? Like early iterations of the DSM had homosexuality pathologized, right? Of course, they got that terribly wrong. But like now, well, just because we call it this, now our community that term should resonate with them. So I like hearing about how different communities, like what are the terms or phrases that they use. And I think it also then leads to, well, what are the sources of help that they get? Because if it's something like PTSD, where it's like, oh, well, I need to go to a formal therapist and get this addressed. But if it's something like susto or ataque de nervios, like, where do you find that people would get help for that?
I feel like the Western approach is limited because it over focuses on the mind. And what I love about our ancestors and what I love about what NIH is doing now is they're understanding the whole person approach, that we're not just separate organs, that there is no mind without the body. There is no body without the mind. People are yearning for whole person approaches. I think people are yearning for something that addresses their mind, body, spirit, heart, and soul, balance, harmony, integration. They might go to therapy, but they also might go to a sobadora or to a curandera. They might go to their pastor for counseling as well as a family therapist. And I feel like none of these are mutually exclusive or even contradictory. I feel like people are looking to feel better, to feel whole, to feel integrated. Personally, I'm so grateful for all the gifted healers that I've met in my journey because they've been everywhere from therapists, mentors, spiritual guides. I've met gifted Reiki practitioners, acupuncturists, massage therapists, and I feel like all of that has helped me to heal and to grow.
We talk a lot about barriers to care, but it's really about barriers to formal specialty mental health care, right? And even the labels that we use sometimes is like, oh, there's these alternative sources of help. And it almost already paints the picture of like, there's primary of like what you're supposed to do, and there's these other kind of alternative things, right? And something in our research lab we've talked about of like, what's a better term? And we kind of landed on complementary care, and you were kind of using that of like, what is going to complement the holistic person in terms of getting help?
And I can understand that there's a fear or a concern or some sort of worry to integrate those because unless it's regulated or unless it's scholarly or rigorously studied, there's such an opportunity for taking advantage of people. And I love that the National Institutes of Health has a center called the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. And so they have a website where they literally list all of the different interventions, herbs. So if you want to know what do we know about yoga and anxiety? Or what do we know about massage and depression? Or what do we know about St. John's wort or valerian root, valeriana, or chamomile or peppermint? Like, what kind of impacts do those things have on mental health and health? And so there is a place where people can go. Our ancestors were onto something. Like, they didn't do things because they didn't know any better. They did things because they worked.
Yeah, it's like this notion of this like one size fits all approach of like, okay, there's this evidence-based protocol, and if you are suffering from anxiety, you need to receive XYZ, and here's the program, and session 1 you're going to do this, and session 2 you're going to do this, and session 3. It doesn't, for some families, work. And then for some providers too, doesn't allow them to flexibly treat the family, right? And I think we should leverage what families are already bringing in, what's already working. So I think of like some of my training experiences, and I think there was a missed opportunity to ask of like, what are the benefits of whatever it is that they're coming in with? If we're talking about formal mental health care, like they're still seeing you in a formal context. So something may not be working in terms of these other complementary care. And that makes sense if they have their foot in the door, right? Like they were referred for, school-based mental health services, or they came to the community-based mental health center. There are some families, there is a segment that is going to need formal therapy, and for some that need medication, right?
Yes.
Right? Meaning we could try mindfulness and herbs and all of these things that might work for some people. So I think sometimes a controversy is there a danger if we're promoting some of these complementary services for people that might need medication, right, or might need formalized mental health? Like, right, what are your thoughts there?
So here I have to go super personal in that I see your point. I see that for some people, they choose so-called natural, complementary, integrative, alternative, traditional practices because they're scared, or it's stigmatizing, or there's this perception that they'll be discriminated against if they participate in the formal mental health system. I'm sure that story exists, that narrative, that experience exists. And I'm sure there are people who've had negative experiences with medication. And so that's the story that's out there, and people are afraid of that story. But I know for me and my family, I have a close family member who has schizoaffective disorder. And so medication completely stabilized his life. I know for me personally, I have probably suffered depression most of my life, but it wasn't until I was at UCLA working on my PhD that I got therapy from a psychologist, and a psychiatrist offered Prozac. Actually, she offered Zoloft first, and then I switched to Prozac because Zoloft was making me first it relaxed me, but then it made me way too sleepy. And I was like, I've got a dissertation to write. And so I switched to Prozac, and I've been on it ever since. And I remember her saying, like, we're going to try to wean you off in 6 months. And I was like, don't you dare. Like, I need to graduate first. And after I graduated, there was a period where I didn't have health insurance until I got a full-time job. And I remember I didn't have access to Prozac. And I remember going back to, for me personally, my depression showed up as symptoms of like irritability and anger. And so I felt it coming back. And so once I got back on health insurance, I was so grateful that I could get on Prozac again. And mind you, I'm doing Reiki, massage, journaling, transcendental meditation, exercise, prayer. Like, I'm doing all these things, but Prozac was a big part of my treatment plan. And then my daughter, I remember taking her to 10 weeks of cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive coping, and then another 10 weeks of social skills, more cognitive behavioral therapy. And actually, she didn't like CBT. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is the gold standard for anxiety and depression. And I do it, and I have seen a reduction in PTSD, anxiety, and depressive symptoms among elementary, middle, high school, college students that I've done it with. And so I'm so grateful for CBT. But my daughter was not into it. And it really wasn't until she tried Prozac for the first time that her behavior, her panic attacks, like everything just, oh my gosh, life became so much more manageable for her.
You're a parent, but you're also an expert. So you know that, oh, there's this medication and there's this kind of, evidence-based approach, but I'm also going to use things that are important to me from a, spiritual perspective. I'm just thinking of like those everyday parents and Latino parents and people that have immigrated here and are just might not necessarily know these nuances, and they might get a message of that they're bad parents somehow.
Yes.
Right?
100%. Oh my God. So definitely that's why they don't. So when parents call to make an appointment for mental health treatment, 50% don't show up.
Mm-hmm. Right off the bat. And 50% on a test is an F. So We're getting Fs. And so parents really try everything before even calling to make an appointment for mental health treatment, because that's their last resort. Because all too often when they seek help, the message, either implicit or explicit, has been, you did something wrong. Like, what's wrong with your parenting, or what did you do to this child? And that's why I'm so glad I'm a parent now, because I freaking love parents. John Bowlby, who's the father of attachment theory and security, who helps us understand the bond between a caregiver and a child, he said, if a society values its children, then we must cherish their parents. And so my message is, parents, caregivers, we cherish and treasure you. Yeah.
Because I think about, and like the work that we do as a parent, there is no other explanation for it than love. Mm-hmm. Like some of the sacrifices we make joyfully, there is no way to understand what we do unless it's love. When I think about how hard it's been for me to be a parent to a daughter with mental health concerns or experiences or struggles, I think I have an LCSW, I have a PhD, I have all this experience, and I'm bringing all of it in and dealing with her, and I still find myself getting overwhelmed. Like I still find myself saying out loud, I don't know what else to do. And I have teachers who I've worked with who reach out to me, educated, caring people who say, like, I'm having this difficulty with mental health in my child. And I'm like, first of all, like, I get you, mom to mom. And I'm so grateful that I have some idea about where you can start at least. But a lot of it, I got from going through it as a parent.
All I was thinking was like empowerment. Like, how do we empower caregivers and parents? We characterize many times Latino families as having deficits, right? Lacking, like they lack education around mental health, and they lack access to resources, and they don't know. So like, although I understand this concept of mental health literacy, then like the assumption is like our community is illiterate, right? So these kind of terms in the kind of jargon and literature, while I think are important to understand, I don't like painting the picture of our communities as having deficits. We could talk about barriers like at the family level and obstacles, and there's tons of literature around, practical or tangible barriers and perceptual barriers, and also major areas like provider level. Yeah. And I'm using the term provider like loosely, like it could be, a licensed clinician, or it could be someone that just interfaces. How do we prepare the workforce to deliver and implement culturally responsive evidence-based care? Like that seems like the key here.
We have to look at it from like 360, like all sides. So there are very good reasons why families are hesitant about reaching out for mental health treatment. And if you think about families who reach out, they might get put, especially now, might get put on a waiting list. They might not have insurance. And they might not have access to therapists who are culturally responsive, who have evidence-based skills, language skills. So there's the hesitancy and the barriers and the access for the families. And then on the other side, in terms of providers, it's just so sad to me because the research clearly shows that regardless of the diagnosis that a child or young person has, the most effective intervention is family systems, parent, like involving the family.
Right.
And yet, if you ask providers, how many of you feel adequately trained to work with families or parents? It's very low.
It's scary, right?
It's very
because
scary.
you're at a school-based context and you're like, okay, I can go pull out Johnny from his 4th grade class and see him. And a lot of times these are trainees, right? These are people that are going to get their social work, their MFT, their PhD or PsyD, and they're learning, they're beginning therapists. And there's this level of comfort you have with working with kids. But then you have a parent in the room that might ask you questions and might be judging and wondering. The parents that I worked with didn't really know what was going on, so they wouldn't know whether something was right or wrong. But I think it points.
That's our fear.
Yeah,
as
but
a
that's
provider.
of like, now I have someone in the room. So I think this notion that Latino parents don't want to be involved in their child's mental health care, I don't see it that way, because all of the research I've done, many times families was like, I didn't know I had the opportunity to be involved. I never once got invited. I remember doing like this semi-structured interview, and like their son had been in school-based mental health therapy for 5 years. And they're like, not once did the therapist reach out to me.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, there's a consent form because you needed to consent. And do you remember ever going? They're like, I remember he brought home like this sheet of paper one time and I signed it. And I'm like, what a missed opportunity for a parent. Because if we're characterizing our parents as not wanting to be involved, to me, that's saying, I don't love my child.
I think, again, there's ambivalence, understandable ambivalence on both sides. So we need to think about what are parents' fears, worries, doubts, questions, concerns about participating in therapy. And in fact, Mary McKay, a social work researcher, she actually did this research, and she found that, as I mentioned, only 50% of parents who call to make appointments show up. But if over the phone, when they're calling to make the appointment, anybody who answers the phone, it could be the receptionist or it could be the mental health person on duty, if they ask the parent making the appointment, what are your fears, worries, doubts, questions, concerns about coming to your first appointment? Just asking that question, exploring the ambivalence, and addressing their concerns upped the chances that they would show up.
Yeah.
So just like families have ambivalence, providers have ambivalence.
Yeah. So that telephone engagement protocol, that was very influential in a lot of the work, in Mary McKay's work, to the work I do. And it's like, you're addressing barriers to care. If you expect someone to do something like show up for an appointment, if you don't ask what's going to get in the way of coming here, just assume that they're not going to show up.
Most families have fears, worries, doubts, questions, concerns about coming in. Like, that's normal.
Yeah.
What are yours?
Right.
And they're like, oh, we're going there. Let's talk then. Okay. You get it. I think we need to do the same thing with providers. We need to ask providers, what are your fears, worries, doubts, questions, concerns about working with families, particularly Latinx or Latina families? Because I think what comes up is what you said, I haven't been adequately trained. I feel comfortable talking to cute little kids, but if a parent asks me a question, I'm afraid they're going to think like I'm incompetent. And I'm like, okay, your fear is they're going to think you're incompetent. Their fear is you're going to call Child Protective Services on it. So the stakes are high all around, but I think they're a little bit higher for families, but that's just me. And when I look at across the country, like nobody is alone in this. Across the country, SAMHSA has looked at school-based mental health services, and the number one intervention provided is individual counseling.
Yeah.
So even though the research, like piles and piles of research, shows family and systems interventions or approaches are doubly effective, like twice as effective, our go-to is individual therapy.
Yeah, it's so the school-based mental health sector is like, 1 in 5 kids in the classroom is going to have some mental health issue going on. Yet 4 out of 5 kids that have that mental health issue aren't going to get help.
Right.
So schools are naturally a place where a lot of these barriers, like these tangible barriers of transportation and childcare and, finances. Well, it's addressed in the school-based context, but then there's an over-reliance on individual. There's expectations from parents too of like, oh yeah, sure, you can see them. And also, how convenient is it for the provider? It's like, I can work within school hours. Like, oh, now you want me to see someone at 6, 7 in the evening when they get off work? Well, sorry, the school's closed, right? So how do we tackle some of those solutions within the school-based sector? Because it's obvious that it addresses a lot of barriers to care, but it could also contribute to this over-reliance on individual therapy. What do we do to integrate parents within the school system?
So I think it's layered. So you talked about tangible barriers. Honestly, what Mary McKay found, and it resonates in my own experience, and I'm sure would resonate for you. Tangible barriers like transportation, childcare, insurance, money, obviously those are real, but that's not really what stops us. We're connected by these bonds of love. If one family member, and I don't care if it's the 2-year-old, I don't care if it's grandma who lives in the home, I don't care if it's a parent or kid, if there is somebody in the system that is in distress, the whole system is in distress. I was a school-based social worker, like 2 years out of grad school with my MSW. My intern, in my internship, my supervisor was a family therapist. So I got to observe her work with families. And I would go do home visits and meet with families. And I would start off with 2 questions. What do you love about your family? And what's one thing you'd like to change?
Right.
Like, that was my assessment. That was my intervention. With those 2 questions, I would have an hour-long home visit. So I learned a rap. So if you call parents and say, the teacher referred your son because they got into a fight on the yard, the parent feels like, oh, I'm getting called into the principal's office. Like, I'm in trouble.
I think some of my early calls were kind of like
right.
that.
Yes. Okay, so you get it. So the parents are just like, oh, shoot, they're going to come in, they're going to blame me. I don't know what to do. I've already tried to punish John, but he doesn't listen. Yeah. Now I'm going to get scolded by the principal. So they don't come in. And so then I learned to change my rap over the phone. And I'm like, Ms. Martinez, your son John got into a fight, and I really want to make sure he's successful at school, and I can't do that unless we work together.
Right.
I have some ideas about what we can do, so that gives the load off of mom, because she's like, I've tried everything. I've got some ideas of what we can do, and then if I've got dad on the phone, Dad, you're the shot caller, which they are, I'm not lying,
right.
And I can't do this. I can't help John turn around and be successful at school without you. And so when I lead with that rap, they're in.
I love it. You just went through several culturally responsive evidence-based practices, right? Collaboration and using language like we're going to work together as a team to figure out what's going on. And you're also flipping it to the positive of not prevent Johnny from getting into fights, but how can we make sure that Johnny's being successful?
Because it's same goal. Who would say they all want the same goal? And I'm telling you, when I worked at Roosevelt High School or North Hollywood High School, I loved because mom and dad would show up. And when mom and dad would show up into my office, I'm like, oh, we're going to get some good stuff done here, because it was during the day. So mom and dad they probably took the day off. There's only one reason why they're doing this. And it's not because they're scared of me or not because they like me. It's because they love their kid.
Right. Yeah.
And they want their kid and they want their family to be better. So it goes back to, why did I dare make that phone call? And I dared make that phone call because I had supervisors who taught me how to work with families. And then if we really want to go deep, what I've observed is that people who work with teenagers and don't involve the family or the parents have their own unresolved issues with their own parents. And we all feel ambivalent about our parents. That's not pathological. We all love and hate our parents. That's all of us.
Right.
But what's interesting is that when you're a mental health provider working with teens, the teen's like, no, I don't want to involve my parents or whatever. And so mental health providers will collude with the teen and be like, okay, no, we'll figure it out. It's just me and you, kid. And I'm like, no,
right,
no. And so I was always going to be like, I'm going to at least give them a chance, because I know nobody loves this kid in front of me more than their parents.
It's a lot to juggle for a provider, right? Because it's you have to connect with the youth and the parent and then siblings and other people in the room. So it's a challenge. But part of what I'm hearing is you can't connect with the youth at the expense of excluding the parent.
Right.
At a point where I'm curious what your thoughts are. Like, if there's like one important key message and what we've been talking about that you want listeners to take away from this podcast, what would that be?
I never want to be, as a mental health provider, I never want to be the most important person in a kid's life. I want to make sure that the people in their life, long term, family, that they're connected. I need to work that out, understand that, live that, play that out with my daughter. And then whatever I learn from that relationship, I want to share with all families. Because I know that that's on a visceral level and on a research level, I know that that's good medicine.
I want to thank you, Dr. Acuña, for sharing your story here and really having open and honest conversation and dialogues around mental health. Thank you.
Thank you.
For more additional content and resources, please go to our website, puentelab.com. Thank you for joining us.